Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on September 8th, 2023 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime at karmicevolution.com. And if you do go to that website page, you can see on the upper right-hand banner the label podcast, and from there you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent podcast, or search the archived listings for past podcasts which you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And another reminder that the new show, drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So, if you do go to karmicevolution.com, while you're there, you'll see above the most recently posted recording of the show, or you listen to it live at those particular times. You'll see a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, needs to be happy. And that downloadable freebie is based on an interview I did with Stephen a couple years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it will sign you up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter, but you can, of course, unsubscribe at any time. So be sure to grab it, though, when you listen to this podcast, whether, again, you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some words of astrological wisdom. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can keep track of upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. I post also on Instagram, but admittedly not as frequently. That's under karmic.evolution, so feel free to follow me there as well. Now, I'm offering still my discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, and this offer is for podcast listeners only. So if you're interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning, of your individual birth chart, in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, and you'd like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back from achieving your most cherished desires in the areas of greatest interest to you, could be your relationships, your career and your job, your finances, or your health, then this is the reading for you. We'll look in this reading at how the energies into which you entered into this lifetime may be keeping you stuck in old habitual patterns, or what I call soul-conditioned behaviors, and how this knowledge can assist you to make different and more positive choices moving forward. So if you'd like to begin to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, as I like to say, that's easy when you take advantage of this special discounted offer at karmicevolution.com /karmic 125. As I also like to say, conscious awareness has never been either so easy or so affordable. And in addition, before I get into this week's Astro News you can use, and as I announced last week, I'm going to be teaching a class on how to delineate aspects in the natal chart under the auspices of the Astrological Society of Princeton, where I'm also a board member, starting on October 15th. So if you've studied basic astrology, learned the meaning of the planets, the signs, and the houses, and now you're ready to take the next step, then this class is for you. Only when astrology enthusiasts and students progress into the realm of learning how to interpret the meaning of aspects, or the angular relationship, or the mathematical relationship between planets in a chart, will they be able to decipher the fuller meaning of how a chart resonates with the life of that person. So if you become passionate about studying astrology, it becomes imperative, and I would add exciting, to understand how to delineate the major energies inherent in a chart to form a more substantial picture of any particular person. If you'd like to step further into your astrological journey to better grasp the ultimate meaning of a chart's overall energies, then join me, again, starting October 15th, and I'll help you hone your chart reading skills through this 8-week course, which will run from October 15th through December 2nd. We'll delve more deeply into the meaning of the major aspects: conjunctions, sextiles, squares, trines, oppositions, quincunxes, grand trines, grand crosses, and more. And of course, I think I left out T-squares. Not all of us have a grand cross, but many of us have a T-square. So if you want to find out more about not only what that is, but how it works, we will study the charts of well-known people to truly verify how they chose in the past, especially if there are people no longer with us, or they choose currently to perceive and manifest the energies into which their souls chose to be born into this lifetime. And this class will include a look at how similar aspects, because I think this is really important, two different charts, two different people may have similar aspects, but these can manifest in completely different ways depending on the overall energies within that chart. So I think that's an enlightening way to learn the archetypal range, or the potential archetypal range, of how an aspect might actually manifest in terms of a person's behavior by looking at their chart and looking at their documented life, either historically or current day people. So, sometimes you might look at an aspect that seems negative, but it can actually be positive, and vice versa. It just depends. So again, if you're interested in joining me starting October 15th for a journey into the beating heart of the chart in order to deepen your chart reading skills and become a more impactful astrologer, you can go to aspnj.org to get on their mailing list. That's the Astrological Society of Princeton, as they'll be sending out their newsletter with the sign-up link sometime next week. The class will be held at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays from, once again, October 15th through December 2nd. And the cost of this class will be $225 for the 8-week duration. You can also feel free to email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, if you have any questions about whether this class is appropriate for you. And finally, I want to reiterate something I mentioned last week too, which is that I'm going to be speaking at the live Astro Bash upcoming conference in Borrego Springs, California. And this conference is taking place from September 28th through October 1st. And it includes talks by such well-known astrologers as Lynn Bell, Maurice Fernandez, Kay Taylor, Armand Diaz, and will also include, among others, there are many, many other speakers, a keynote presentation by Stephen Forrest. My topic is going to be the fight for women's equality in America, the history of the U.S. Sibley Chart's Chiron return, women's rights, and the 2024 U.S. presidential election. So you might want to check it out. It might be too late to book a flight to California, especially if, like me, you're from the East Coast, but there's a new streaming option that you can avail yourself of and find out more about. I think it's $250 for being able to get the recordings of the lectures from all of the presentations. And for more information on that, all you need to do is go to astro-bash.com for more information or to register. Okay, so now let's get into this week's astro news you can use. I'm going to try and pick up the speed a little here because I've got a lot to say, and you know, a lot of it is about the current Mercury retrograde, but I want to make sure that I can get to it all, so forgive me if I rush a bit. But so last week I spoke about the basic intent of the 6 planets currently retrograde, though I realized afterward that I kind of left out Chiron retrograde in Aries. So I will probably get to that again because he's retrograde for quite some time. I'll get to that in future podcasts. But first, let's take a deeper look at Mercury's current retrograde in Virgo, especially since the messenger god will be stationing at the next Virgo New Moon on September 14th at 8 degrees and 16 minutes of Virgo, just before he begins direct motion again on September 15th. Also, let me remind everyone about the higher purpose of Mercury's retrograde periods, which occur 3 to 4 times per year, usually 21 to 22 days each, and cycle backward through the elements. In addition, they always have a larger overall meaning than simply the typical do's and don'ts of Mercury retrograde that almost everyone on the planet is familiar with at this point in time. And one of the major reasons we're often cautioned by astrologers against signing contracts and buying expensive items like cars and houses and appliances that we might experience electronic communication breakdowns through things like the loss of a cell phone or problems with our computers or our iPads or our cars or other mechanical issues, is because our mind is elsewhere. Yes, literally elsewhere. So it's during Mercury retrograde periods that we're growing in consciousness, just as with the other planets' retrograde periods, but Mercury's retrogrades are clearly shorter in duration, although more frequent. So the real reason to pay attention to all those Mercury retrograde cautionary pieces of advice is because our psyches are busy transferring learned information into the deeper recesses of our inherent pool of soul knowledge, while simultaneously what's been buried deeply in terms of our soul wisdom, mostly of that, a lot of that we're not conscious of because it's from the past, we're allowing it during Mercury's retrograde period to float up and into greater consciousness now. So since Mercury's December 2022 and January 2023 retrograde period was in earthy Capricorn, and its April-May 2023 retrograde transited through Earth or backward through earthy Taurus, and now it's been retrograding in earthy Virgo since August 23rd, and will, as I just mentioned, station direct in Virgo on September 15th, we're being asked to review and assess the tangible results of our lives thus far. Now, I mentioned that last week, but it bears reiteration. The implication of this, while Mercury's retrograding through Virgo, is to allow us to recognize more consciously where true security lies within, and if this is lacking, what we really need to feel secure. So let's take a little closer look at the Mercury-ruled Virgo archetype. Virgo is an energy that often believes perfection is actually possible. which is, a notable reason why this archetype often gets a bad reputation for being overly nitpicky and critical. And this can often be true, but understanding from where this need derives, this need for perfection derives, is key. So if Virgo seeks perfection, which when we think about it really can never be achieved, and so it sets us up for a constant or long-term sense of failure. No archetype can be more self-critical than Virgo, at least in my opinion, just as no archetype can be more self-judgmental than Saturn's Capricorn. Then during this Mercury retrograde, it's been time to review where such feelings of imperfection affect our ability to produce tangible results, because doing so can increase our sense of inner security in the end. In other words, feeling imperfect all the time leads to low self-worth and low self-esteem, right? So, what's the point of that? Plus, when we take what we've already learned empirically, we've learned it from the outside world, and Virgo is an empirical archetypal energy, given that it's an earth sign concerned with taking information gathered by Geminian energy, parsing it, categorizing it, and analyzing it in order to come to a conclusion. The word discernment becomes key, as in discerning what's factually true. Hence the earthy, concrete, physically manifestable portion of the Virgo archetype versus what's mere opinion, perception, or outright falsehood. In short, Virgo allows us to understand context, which is the key to finding the ultimate meaning behind any form of communication. In fact, I'd say that Virgo, along perhaps with the Scorpio archetype, are the two best archetypal energies designed to closely examine what's being said, written, or shouted from the rooftops as gospel, that can best succeed at getting to the bottom of the true meaning and intent of such communication. Again, these two are best at detecting how to discern, through the process of deep evaluation, research, evaluation, and detailed inspection, what's true and what is not, based on the actual, factual, empirical, real evidence. So getting down to such brass tacks, as they say, ultimately adds to our overall foundational sense of security, because it provides us the terra firma upon which communication becomes a put up or shut up energy. You got proof? Show me. You ain't got proof? F off. Sorry, that's the New Yorker in me coming out. And this is especially true if we've been lacking in that concrete sense of understanding that the ultimate intent of any communication, I'm reading that wrong. This is especially true if we're lacking in that concrete sense of understanding the ultimate intent of any communication that comes at us. So in other words, if something is factually true, there's a underlining foundational sense of security in it because we can prove it. So it's interesting to review now that the Sun met Mercury retrograde in Virgo on September 6th of this past week, just 2 days ago, but that this is the second time this aspect has occurred, the first one being on June 30th, when both planets were direct in Cancer. It's not the second time this year, it's the second time in Mercury's cycle. So when both the Sun and Mercury are direct and they come together, it's known as the superior conjunction. And when they meet again, when Mercury's retrograde, it's called the inferior conjunction. And it's known as what Jungian astrologer Aries Sullivan calls the Epimethean phase. Now, those of you who listen to this show or podcast frequently know that I like to quote Aries Sullivan a lot. She has two fabulous books. One is Retrograde Planets Traversing the Inner Landscape, which I referred to last week and will again now, and also a book that I quite like, which is called Saturn in Transit, and that delineates Saturn through the signs and the houses, which is an excellent book as well. But anyway, Sullivan says in her Retrograde Planets book, and I quote, "The Promethean phase of the entire cycle from the inferior conjunction, which is what just occurred, to the superior conjunction, which is the next time that the two will meet when Mercury is once again direct, is a time in the cycle when risk and adventure is the primary motivating force. The epimethean phase of Mercury from the superior conjunction, which now we're looking at from, if we look back, the last one was that June 30th, to the inferior conjunction of September 6th, is a time of reaping results. And Sullivan continues, Prometheus translates as forethought and Epimetheus as afterthought. They come, of course, from the Greek mythology, and they were both brothers. So fundamentally, the Promethean cycles of Mercury are times of gathering resources and information, exercising skills, implementing action with direct confrontation, while the Epimetheus cycles are for reaping the rewards of experience, researching ideas, comprehending meaning, and refining raw materials, according to Sullivan. So at the time of Mercury's most recent station retrograde, which was August 23rd, quote, an opportunity to curtail action arises, allowing the results of the last month and a half of activity to surface of their own accord, as Sullivan says. Now, at the September 6th inferior conjunction of the Sun to Mercury retrograde, we begin to become cognizant of, and again here I quote, the various woes that come to us when we go beyond ourselves and overreach our natural boundaries, she adds. So in other words, the Mercury retrograde cycle, according to Aaron Sullivan, is a pullback, right? Not just in the sense that things don't happen or that they get stuck or stymied or delayed, which, yes, is all possible. It's a time for us, like I said, to be cognizant that maybe we've overreached. Maybe our plans were too grandiose. Maybe they were unrealistic. You know, there's a whole different number of reasons why that might be true, depending on our individual charts and the transits and progressions affecting them. But to me, this is interesting in the political context of the current judicial cases involving, yes, Donald Trump. So some of you may know or remember that his natal Mercury sits in his 11th house at 8 minutes and 51 degrees of Cancer, square to his natal second house Neptune at 5 degrees and 50 minutes of Libra. So they are in square aspect only 3 degrees apart. Now, squares represent inner tensions, which according to renowned traditional astrologer Bernadette Brady, and here I quote from her book, Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark, are nobody's fault, but are forcing you into a new kind of action. So I continue to quote from her book, an event will occur for which it is impossible to blame anybody, but results in you being forced into a mode of action that you have not yet explored, and it forces action in new areas. Now, I will throw a caveat into that because Brady's book was written a good 40 years ago, and she is a traditional astrologer, and I would just say from the evolutionary point of view, it's not really that a square would be interpreted as not being related to anybody or anything. It's probably related to the energies you brought with you from past lifetimes and that reincarnated with you or with us, and that it is here for us to integrate, right, to reconcile the energies. So because I'm using Donald Trump as an example, I think it's a lot easier to understand it that way. You know, it's not, people aren't, things aren't happening to him where there's no blame. They happen to him because of his own past behaviors. And that's true for all of us. Whether we, intended those behaviors to be positive or negative isn't the relevant point. So in Trump's case, we know that his natal Mercury-Neptune square has manifested as someone who's been great at projecting out into the world a particular image, that of a successful businessman and a reality TV show star. What lies behind this brand he's built, however, may rest only on illusion rather than reality. So since Mercury began its retrograde journey at 21 degrees 29 minutes of Virgo on August 23rd, it's stationed in Trump's first house, but within less than half a degree of his second house cusp at 21 degrees and 9 minutes of Virgo. So when Mercury stationed retrograde that day, it was a mere 10 days after the Promethean phase of Mercury's cycle ended, a cycle which began on June 30th, as I said, when the Sun met Mercury direct in Cancer. Hold on. Okay, so between June 30th and August 23rd, both DOJ Special Counsel Jack Smith and Georgia DA Fani Willis announced their indictments against Donald Trump. August 2nd was the date of Jack Smith's first set of indictments against Trump and 6 unindicted co-conspirators, and it was August 14th when he and 18 other co-conspirators were indicted on RICO charges, accusing them of conspiring to interfere in that state's 2020 presidential election on behalf of unlawfully allowing Trump to remain in office even though he lost that election. So since Mercury stationed retrograde in Trump's first house, a lot of this current transit for him relates to his natal 11th house Mercury, which as Bernadette Brady puts it in her predictive astrology book, means that, quote, it is the advice or action of friends which stimulates events to occur in another part of your life. There is increased socializing leading to events coming to a head elsewhere. Like his old pal Mark Meadows, whose original trove of checks and emails formed the initial basis of Smith's foundational research into Trump's attempts to overturn a legitimate election, and in doing so, prevailing upon the natal energy of his indirect, obfuscating, often circularly illogical Mercury-Neptune square to confuse people with his words. Next, the action of a transit usually takes place in the house where it's occurring. So in this case, that's the first house. And here Brady notes that this, quote, implies that the area with which you are most concerned is your physical body, your appearance, and your independence. Like how people view you, right? Remember I said on one of my earlier podcasts that transiting Pluto's quincunxing his 2953 degree Leo ascendant, and that transiting Uranus recently stationed retrograde at 23 degrees and 5 minutes of Taurus, only a little over a degree away from his 24 degree 18 minute Taurus midheaven, or also known as the 10th house cusp. So the first house, where Mercury is retrograding, is allowing Trump to understand that how people see him, both physically and in his ability to move freely, is perhaps changing. If you've heard at least one political pundit review all of his upcoming court dates in New York and Washington, D.C. and Georgia, with at least 2 cases in New York now, Letitia James and I just slipped my mind, but you know what I'm talking about, the DA and the assistant, the attorney general, and the district attorney, Alvin Bragg. Sorry, he slipped my mind for a second. And 2 in D.C. and another one in Georgia. And then, of course, in New York, there's also the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. So if you've heard only one political pundit, believe me, they're all doing the same thing and listing all of these dates about how, busy he's going to be with legal work. And as for the Uranus 10th house transit, the planet of unexpected change will be exact on his midheaven on June 23rd, 2024. Before that, however, this transit's effects will increase in strength when Uranus achieves the position of the degree before his midheaven as it approaches, which will happen circa May 16th, 2024. So there's lots to follow, right? I mean, especially since it will begin to well, I'm thinking about the primaries, right? Because the Georgia cases is now scheduled to begin on March 4th, which is the day before Super Tuesday. But according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, the earliest state primaries for 2024 are held March 5th, with the latest in mid-September. With 13 primaries each, June and August are the busiest months for state primaries. So my point is that while all this is going on between now and then, Trump's got an awful lot of court dates. Now, you don't need me to tell you that, obviously, but remember that I said Mercury's current retrograde and then its continuing direct movement relate to his natal 11th house Mercury. Well, the 11th house is also traditionally known as the house of the legislature. Okay, let's all have a big giant snort together now. So, to finish out Trump's Mercury retrograde transit's effects, we must look at the house or houses ruled by Mercury in his natal chart, particularly the one with Virgo on the cusp. Well, we already know that's his second house. During Mercury retrograde, it was ruled this past week that E. Jean Carroll, who already won a $5 million settlement from him for both sexual abuse and defamation, does not have to prove defamation again from the time for the second time after her case concluded that Trump defamed her on CNN during that interview with Caitlin Collins that caused the ultimate firing of the head of CNN, Chris Licht. Now, the judge in that case has decided that all that remains to be decided now is the amount of damages Trump will owe Carroll based on this second defamation case. So get out the popcorn, all right, because that trial begins January 15th, at least for now. Who knows? These dates may change, which also happens to be the day of the Iowa Republican caucuses. But it appears that we may well begin to be able to start munching on our snackies as soon as October 2nd, which is less than a month from now, since Trump's first trial date in New York is scheduled then. As per PBS News on August 30th, and I quote, New York Attorney General seeks immediate verdict in fraud lawsuit against Trump since New York's Attorney General... And in the article it says that New York's Attorney General Letitia James, quote, says a judge doesn't need to wait until an October trial in her civil lawsuit against former President Donald Trump to rule that he committed fraud while building his real estate empire. In court papers made available last week, Attorney General Letitia James urged Judge Arthur Engoron to issue an immediate verdict endorsing her claim that Trump and his company defrauded banks and business associates by lying on financial statements about his wealth and the value of his assets. Engoron has scheduled a September 22nd hearing on James' request. Her lawsuit, which seeks $250 million in penalties and a ban on Trump doing business in New York, is scheduled to go to trial October 2nd, as we said, in state court in Manhattan. Even if Engoron rules on the fraud claim, he would still preside over a non-jury trial on other claims in the lawsuit if it is not settled. Now, plus, if you're in the mood to snack while watching these incremental movements in the Georgia District Attorney's case, you can tune into the televised court TV, whatever, I said that, televised court proceedings, that's the word I left out, of Judge Scott McAfee's preliminary hearings and petitions by both representatives of the state of Georgia, who are arguing on behalf of the DA's case, and some of the 18 RICO indicted co-conspirators' attorneys that have already been aired. So far, we found out on September 6th, again, the date of Mercury retrograde's inferior conjunction with the Sun, that Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell will be tried together under Georgia's Speedy Trial Act. And this has prompted pundit Keith Olbermann on his Countdown podcast to muse that this trial might be dubbed Cheese and Kraken. for those of you who don't remember. And I can't imagine you, Joan, if you're listening to this, Sidney Powell is the Kraken lady. Anyway, the question now is whether John Eastman, another co-conspirator in the case, who's rumored to be considering asking for an expedited trial ahead of the already set March 24th, 2024 trial date, also may reconsider, since none of those accused seem to want to be lumped together in any way. But Judge McAfee has already made clear that in the interest of both time, the process of selecting or having to select different juries for each case, and the fact that much of the same evidence will be presented if there are separate trials. They will all be presented at trials with smaller. They could be, because the DA is now arguing that she wants to try everyone together starting on October 23rd. But the judge has already said that the trial for Sidney Powell and Ken Chesebro can be expedited and start on October 23rd. And again, as I just said, we're waiting to see if any of the other co-defendants will choose to go with those two now that they know that they can't be tried separately or alone, as a solo defendant. So anyway, the judge had ruled that, keeping a trial for one individual separate based on the Speedy Trial Act right that they have is neither cost effective or efficient. Now remember, I told you last week that Jupiter stationed retrograde on September 4th, and that this retrograde period is really about reconciling what we think we want with what's actually best for us or what we truly need. So let's apply that now to one of the most significant interpretations of the meaning of Jupiter, the law. Things may well slow down for a while with all of the current retrogrades in the sky, but Mercury will be out of his retrograde soon enough, and as we've now just passed its inferior conjunction to the Sun, it's time between now and September 15th, as the monthly lunar cycle continues currently to wane through its third quarter, in anticipation of that upcoming Virgo New Moon, that the inferior conjunction marks the point at which, quote, Mercury is metaphorically coming home to check on its status. It marks a time to rest and recuperate, scaling down initiatory action and allowing the unconscious to work, as per Aaron Sullivan. So the station direct of Mercury, which again occurs on September 15th, less than a day after the Virgo New Moon occurs, quote, is the scene of another threshold struggle, according to Sullivan. All planetary retrogrades are loaded with potential and power, she says, but Mercury direct is particularly tense. If one has been in sync with the cycle, she adds, then the alterations necessary during the early stage of direction will have been anticipated and prepared for. She means after Mercury stations direct on the 15th. They then can be incorporated into the psyche and the environment. The direction of Mercury is the indicator that it is time to engage in observation and begin to pay attention. All right, so somebody better tell that to Donald Trump, right? Because soon his case will be discussed regularly right from the courtroom, whether it's his trial of one or two or more of his co-defendants, meaning Chesebro and Sidney Powell, which will start in less than 2 months, and whether he is present or not. So people who watch parts of these proceedings will be far more cognizant that they're able to observe, and that perhaps it's important to pay attention now when not so many did before, right? So we've got, like I said, it's the only televised one right now will be the proceedings out of Georgia, but the judge has also said that he set another time for next Thursday. All of the proceedings are televised, not just the actual trial. And so every week he's proposed meeting with the defense attorneys and the attorneys for the state so that they can clarify all these motions and requests, by both parties, and the judge can make decisions so that they can get to the speedy portion of the actual trial. And then, of course, there'll be the Letitia James thing, which won't be televised in New York, but then we'll have Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro by October 23rd, and that's the Georgia case, so that will be televised as well. So it isn't long before this is going to be on the nightly news and the front page of every newspaper and on the cable stations and all over the internet. Now, there's so much more that we can attribute to domestic politics and other things globally, given how much is actually going on both here and in the rest of the world now. Like whether, domestically, whether requests by people like Mark Meadows and Jeffrey Clark to move their trials to a federal court will succeed, but there's simply not enough time for me to delve into all of those details. But fear not, because Mercury will remain in Virgo until October 4th. So we'll get to some of that anon. But, the most important part, I think, is for us to keep track of what I've been saying about Mercury retrograde, because I hope it's been interesting to you, because I really do feel like if we take a deeper look, and Sullivan is one of the only ones, she's not the only one by far, but the only one that I tuned into years ago who can really give us a very deep dive into the whole Mercury retrograde cycle. Now, before I turn to the upcoming Virgo New Moon, before the end of the show, which occurs at 21 degrees and 59 minutes of Virgo at 6:40 p.m. Pacific Time and 9:40 p.m. Eastern Time on September 14th, let me note that today, September 8th, the Virgo Sun trined Jupiter in Taurus in the early morning hours, which is a particularly feel-good energy, which I described in more detail in last week's podcast. My wish is for that feel-good energy to last for all of us, at least through the weekend, so that we may continue to bask in Jupiter's glow, even though, yes, he's retrograde, for a while longer. Meanwhile, September 11th marks the 22nd anniversary, that's this coming Monday, of 9/11, as the Virgo Sun quincunxes Chiron in Aries. It seems appropriate that we're still making adjustments, to dealing with this horrific event which took the lives of so many of our countrymen, including not only those in and around the World Trade Towers that day in New York City, but also those on the hijacked airplanes, as well as those like first responders and others who either perished or who suffer from illnesses related to the aftermath and clearing debris, or even those office workers who just continue to work in that area of downtown Manhattan, as well, of course, as those who ultimately perished because of the diseases that were directly linked to breathing in the air and the debris and all of that downtown. Now, as we approach the Virgo New Moon, Mercury will be virtually stationary, getting ready to go direct less than 24 hours later. And since Mercury rules Virgo, this will be pretty impactful, especially since I noticed that this lunation has only one planet in an air sign, which is Mars in Libra. Now, I spoke about Mars in Libra last week when I noted that I thought the traditional negative interpretation of the planet of war being in the sign of peace, compromise, partnership, equality, and harmony might be overstated. Since then, though, as I've watched events unfold, it's interesting to me that one of the things I noticed is that Russia's Vladimir Putin is reportedly going to meet with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un in order to curry favor with him so as to be able to buy weapons that are needed for Putin's persistent war with Ukraine. Now, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as the saying goes, and this kind of example would seem to prove that to be true. Since Mars entered Libra August 27th, it seems to me we could define any potential Putin-Kim Jong-un partnership as a marriage of convenience in order to continue a war against a country backed by nations they consider to be their enemies. For example, both the United States, a lot of the Western European nations who also happen to be NATO allies. Likewise, I think we can relate this Mars and Libra energy also, which lasts until October 11th and 12th, depending on your time zone, when Mars enters Scorpio, to partnering of any kind that aims to defeat or do harm to another or others. I'm thinking about those who've turned again against Donald Trump, just to stay on that theme still, by testifying against him. We learned recently that Yuscil Taveras, who was one of the IT guys down at Mar-a-Lago, agreed to be exonerated of any charges in the classified documents case against Trump in Florida, leading the pundit Keith Olbermann also to sing, "You've picked a fine time to leave me, Yuscil." Now, speculation is rampant that there will be others who'll turn tail too. Some of his co-defendants have indeed already attempted to do so by pointing the finger at him and telling prosecutors that basically he made me do it. Now, a lot of those who have said that are the lesser known co-conspirators in the Georgia case who tampered with the election machinery in Cook County, or who signed documents saying that they were legitimate electors when of course they were not. I'd speculate that others will undoubtedly do the same, and it remains to be seen if and when Mars enters Scorpio, that the wound by the knife stuck in Trump's side has the desired retributionary effect, and we shall of course see. Anyway, back to the Virgo New Moon, which is when we'll want to plant all of the positive things about the Virgo archetype, including our ability to discern fact from fiction and to understand that we can control our environment without having to control everyone and everything in it. In the end, we want to blossom into a greater sense of physical security that eliminates the worry that we're not perfect enough. Again, what I said before, right? The Virgo archetype leaves us in its worst form with the sense that we're not perfect, so we keep striving to be perfect, and every time we fall short in our own estimation, it reduces our own sense of self-worth and self-esteem. But to build up a sense of self-worth and self-esteem is, as I also said before, the way to form a foundation of inner security, right? So my best advice at this lunation is to repeat the best Virgo mantra I know, which is, I am perfect in all my imperfections. And to concentrate on things like the serenity prayer, which asks the universe to grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think we're going to need to remember that next week, since Mars in Libra is the only air planet in the sky, and lack of an element, or only one in lack of a planet in an element, or only one planet in an element, or lack of a planet in a cardinal, fixed, or mutable mode. Sorry, that's a modality. Is what Carl Jung called inferior function. Now, I know I've mentioned that on the show before, but not, all the time. But that means that our ability in the lack of air means the ability to relate to others, relate socially, relate with each other, lies underneath in the psyche's unconscious realm and tends to burst through onto the scene during times of stress or crisis. It feels like we may already be seeing this, even close to a week away from this new moon, with Trump's barrage of tweets calling people like Jack Smith and Judge Chutkan, who's presiding over the Smith case, all kinds of names. And he does it when? In the dead of the night. I mean, he does it all the time. And we know he's a sun, Uranus, and Gemini, so there's a little bit a lack of impulse control, perhaps a little mania. But the lack of air can manifest as a lack of objectivity, which in turn can create anxiety or things like panic attacks, phobias, OCD, and stuff like that. So I'm thinking someone, aka Trump, is getting pretty anxious by now. And because he's a Mars in Leo on his Leo ascendant, he likes to let everyone know how he's feeling every day and every night. Again, without that filter because of that Sun Uranus in Gemini, which also opposes his south node on his moon in Sagittarius. So the moon gets agitated and starts, Jupiter Sagittarius is more. Sun and Uranus in Gemini is, oh, another thought, wait, and also that, and oh, I forgot, right? So we've got this whole kind of weird dynamic going on, but I think it's going to affect everyone, is what I'm trying to say. But this lunation, that's not all, also lacks fire, because the only planet in a fire sign is Venus in Leo. So similarly known as inferior function, this often manifests as rage and aggression, obsession, and a kind of bipolar behavior that might flip between mania and depression. Once again, related to Trump, you think? I mean, the other thing that the airwaves are full of now by all the different pundits is how, he's as Michael Cohen would say, pooping in his pants right now. So if we look at this universally, however, we also know that both luminaries are waxing into trines to Uranus retrograde in Taurus, which is a perfect time for new revelations and discoveries, and trines to Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, which can help us review where we feel disempowered and to more easily begin to remedy that. Right? A trine is an easier aspect that can, help us say, okay, let me this time not give in. Let me draw the line in the sand. Let me say no. Let me, find ways to empower myself. Because, of course, ultimately, along with the other stuff that goes along with this Virgo New Moon, we increase our sense of self-worth and self-esteem, right? Oh, I resisted. Oh, I said no. Oh, I wasn't a pushover. Oh, he didn't get one over on me. It's that kind of stuff, right? Makes you feel better about yourself. Well, fool me once, shame on me. Shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? But without all that beating yourself up stuff. Now, the monkey wrench in the works, however, may be felt in the sun-moon oppositions to Neptune retrograde in Pisces, which can result in confusion. Let's not forget that, psychological astrology says that Neptune is the planet of illusion, confusion, and delusion. So combined with the lack of air, confusion can also result in anxiety. And when we add in the lack of fire, can make one feel either lethargic and depressed or manic. So it remains to be seen how people feel on an individual basis, but there may well be some back and forth within the collective, and that's especially true now, again, to go back to domestic politics, that U.S. Congress is back in session, and they'll soon begin anew the battle over approving the budget for the next year. Remember, Virgo also is often related to numbers. It's in words and numbers. It's like, for example, people who think in numbers or see numbers. There's a, what do they call it? This isn't the right term. It's like divine mathematics, So dealing with numbers as Mercury stations direct at and in the waxing portion of the lunar monthly cycle of the Virgo New Moon, we will probably see domestic politics turn to a great degree of analysis over numbers in relationship to our budget. We also, of course, have, for example, the list of 10 medications that Medicare will now be able to negotiate with Big Pharma. Things like that are going to be discussed. And again, by the time Mars gets to Scorpio, there'll probably be more battles over these things, but we shall see. So people will take sides. Mars in Libra. I'm on this side, he's on that side. This has already been happening. This is nothing new, right? So I just think we can expect more of the same. And I said, deja vu, but remember to watch for those martial alliances as they strengthen or wane over the next few weeks. We can observe, we can learn, we can discern, and then we can use these energies of this Virgo new moon to instill a greater sense of security about our own sense of self-esteem and self-worth. And that's what it's all about. All right, thanks everyone again for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, September 8th, for, no, it's not the 8th. Hold on, I just made a mistake. It will be Friday, September 15th, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the